As you know, my name is Gareth Haysom. I'm an urban food systems researcher working at the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town. I'll be talking through a few key emerging concepts as these pertain to urban food systems work in African and southern cities. But many of these concepts and ideas have relevance to all cities. This presentation is on the governance gaps associated with city regionalism. This presentation will build on an earlier discussion on city regionalism, highlighting some of the emerging governance gaps in relation to the city-region food system approach. Part 1. In a recent article by leading urban thinkers, Jessica Espy, Sue Parnell, and Arama Revi, it was argued that, and I quote, 2020 to 2022 brought into sharp relief a number of complexities facing the first fully urban generation. First, increasing zoonotic diseases and pandemics. Second, more disasters, conflict, and extreme climatic events. Third, the complexity of high-density living and rapid urbanization. Fourth, and relatedly, exponential demographic growth in some parts of the world, and the migratory trends associated with it. And finally, increasing inequality in incomes and employment exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The authors continue stressing the interwoven nature of these challenges and their deeply local ramifications require macro-analytical capacity alongside integrated community responses and local networked action. Particularly pressing is how crises, individual and multiple, are governed as they play out in high-density areas, including the 10,000 small, medium and megacities around the world, home to 55% of the world's population. The urban agendas, agreed in 2015 and 2016 through true intergovernmental processes, the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda, explicitly attempted to tackle the new urban locus of policy formation and implementation. Whilst both processes had different points of emphasis, they shared a commitment to place-based development, emphasized new forms of devolved governance. So then, what is this devolved governance? And what does this mean for urban food systems? Part 2. Jane Battersby has set out a number of aspects pertaining to city regionalism, to the benefits and limitations of city-region or city-region food systems perspective. Here I want to ask one simple question, a question drawn from Management 101 type thinking. The question then is, so who wakes up and worries about the urban food system? There is an old saying that supports this question. It's a story about people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. As someone who focuses a lot of my urban food systems work on governance, this is a question that I constantly ask myself. I argue that the city-region food systems approach is both power and governance agnostic. Some might argue that in no way does the city-region food system approach seeks to undermine the power of cities to govern their food system. And that might be quite correct. Cities are increasingly showing that they can act and intervene in the food system, albeit in a somewhat different ways. However, when the dominant discourse, when significant funding, when resources and structural support are being directed at a more regional approach, power shifts and cities become secondary in these wider trends. To be somewhat tongue-in-cheek, what was evident during COVID and in other crises was that it ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. The reality is that the food system is in a state of crisis. The poor are facing significant challenges. Past approaches to food security, driven by national and regional approaches, are increasingly unable to respond to the food system needs of the urban majority. COVID-19 showed the extent of this failure. For effective devolved governance to be applied, power needs to be challenged, and somebody needs to have the authority to wake up and worry about the food system and the urban food system. Part 3. Power is not just political. power spans multiple dimensions: structural power, gendered, historical power. We have bureaucratic power, which includes things like finance policies, operating procedures, etc., the role that national auditors might play in decision making. We see political power where we see policy obsessions. We see political favours. These all intersect to create different socio-political environments in which cities have to act. There's also legal power, power that is enabled through legislation and policies. But then there's also ideological power that comes through worldviews, faith, culture, social structure. We have network power that is built through relationships, histories, beholdencies, obligations. We also see things like hidden power, such as whiteness, misogyny, prejudice, that's not hidden to the people receiving it. These all play out and are all asserted in different ways. The intersections between how power lands and how governance is enacted is a critical thing to consider. These power dimensions that I suggest here manifest differently across different scales. And so when one asks who has the authority to act, that authority is often bounded by a particular political structure. In Kenya, as an example, you have national and county, and there are some power that sits at the urban scale. But often the county is the main actor in the food governance space, and that presents a more city-regional approach. But in itself comes with different challenges because the county government doesn't necessarily manage the urban planning environment. And so again, you have the everybody, nobody, somebody, anybody tension. In other contexts, you have a national government that is particularly powerful. Often opposition parties control the city, and so you see this constant battle, a constant exchanging of power that plays out across these spaces. Given the ways in which national governments have traditionally been structured, food systems perspectives don't necessarily engage or act directly on what an urban area might need. So again, the city-region food system approach, while important in offering benefits and offering resilience, as Jane Battersby has mentioned, also has the potential to fracture, to make more complicated and complex how government and governance act. Who has the authority to act is a key governance question. That somebody needs to have the political, fiscal, and bureaucratic authority to act. Part 4, into the nexus. It's not just a city-region food system concept that is agnostic when it comes to issues of who wakes up and worries about the system. Food clearly is connected in many other systems, but here we have the food, water, energy nexus concept asking similar questions to the city-region food systems concept, making connections across scales. Yes, things connect in urban space, but one is engaging in a system that is managed and governed from outside the urban space, energy provided by a national energy regulator with its whole set of policies, water that comes from dams and catchments and other systems that are governed by other actors, different water boards, etc. Trying to then combine these different scales creates a governance tangle, a bird's nest, if you will, of governance issues, and this doesn't provide the clarity that is necessary to enact effective food systems change. Part 5. Enacting governance at the urban scale. My argument here is that whilst it's certainly possible to work with and engage a wider nexus, two critical issues emerge. To engage in work that spans multiple scales, multiple governance tiers, and as a result will always end up being some compromise, a mediated agreement. The eventual outcome, in my view, is never necessarily the optimal outcome for the urban poor, the urban consumer, that urban residents that are subjected to generations of slow violence. It is, by its very nature of multi-party, multi-sphere, multi-scale, multi-policy political discussions, a compromise. Compromise is never best interest of the urban consumer. The second point is that essential when considering the urban food system that we have today is the intersection between the urban system and the food system. This means that the greatest effort around creating food system governance needs to be the essential negotiation that takes place at a particular governance scale, that takes place in a transversal manner across various different actors and activities in a particular governance domain. So in the case of the urban scale, How does someone engaged in urban food systems governance engage with water and sanitation departments, engage with spatial planning, engage with economic development, engage with policing, engage with health, engage with education? When you think of all these departments then having to engage with their intermediaries at other scales outside the urban domain, it is no longer a bird's nest. It's what one might call a horrendogram, for want of a better description. The essential work that has to happen at the urban scale is around connecting the various different urban actors as well as society to be able to govern the food system. This elevates the framing of food security, as discussed, from a project or a focus on a household to different urban scales. The individual and household are still key, but their needs differ to that of the neighborhood, who again has different needs to that of the city. This means that the practice of urban governance does span scales, but scales within a governance domain where urban actors have the authority to act. When it comes to food in a predominantly urban world, in an urban world that is urbanizing in ways that are yet to be effectively understood, particularly in the global south, we have to develop new models of engagement across different tiers and spheres of government with different responsibilities. I am not at all trying to take away the responsibility of national government to manage production, to engage in global trade treaties around food. I am absolutely not asking for regional governments to not do the work that they do on food. What I believe has to happen from an urban food governance perspective, and what I think sits at the very essence of the urban food governance and the urban food question in cities of the south, this is to ask, how do cities themselves wake up and worry about their food systems? Because if you can't manage something, you can never develop an effective policy to respond to the challenges it presents. We need a different understanding of how we govern in a system where the sites at which the greatest number of residents and the greatest number of residents in need might sit. We need to start to actually dictate how the food system functions at that scale. The other tiers of governance need to respond to those needs. Currently, some of the concepts that are travelling are not necessarily going to deliver what one might imagine. It is absolutely essential for cities to start to engage how they govern their own food systems within their boundaries and within their systems. How cities govern the flows into their systems, the associated risks, is essential, but key is how cities actively engage in controlling their own food systems. These questions speak back to the lessons learnt over the 2020-22 period in the quotes. These speak directly to what devolved governance entails. Devolved food systems governance cannot be regulated to some form of negotiated compromise where fiscal and bureaucratic power sits elsewhere. All this will do is to perpetuate more of the same. In an urban world, this is no longer possible, morally or politically.